That's fine. Well, yeah, so welcome everyone. Thank you guys for joining us for Bundok Mountain panel on intergenerational healing and trauma. Um, yeah, we're so excited to have you guys join us. We hope you guys are all staying safe and healthy right now. Um, for those of you who don't know us, welcome. We're Creative the Color Boston. Our mission is to not only showcase and celebrate artists of color in and around the Boston area, but also to provide spaces for these artists to connect and create together. My name is Tammy Jean Fedestin, and my co-director is Jeanette Ann Santos. Hello,
Hi,
Jeanette.
welcome.
Hey, yeah, so I will be your moderator this evening, and Jeanette will be helping to monitor the discussion this evening as well. Um, yeah, so I would also like to let you guys know, just a heads up, this discussion is being recorded right now, and it is also being live streamed at the moment on our Facebook page. So just so you have a heads up, and it will also be posted on our website post event this weekend. Um, all right, so today, as I mentioned, we will be discussing intergenerational trauma and healing. Intergenerational trauma is defined as the transmission of historical oppression and its negative consequences across generations. When discussing this topic, the panel with Jeanette, my colleague, a few common subtopics kept coming up, like discipline, gender roles, dual identity, cultural reconciliation, Western beauty standards, religion, self care, and definitely guilt. Um, so we're excited to dive into these subtopics a little deeper with our panelists today. So joining us today, we have Jay Cottle, Executive Director of Dunamis Boston. Wave hello, Jay. Uh, we also have JennyMae Co, writer, musician, and multidisciplinary artist. Say hello.
Hi, everyone.
We have Leslie Condon, visual artist, administrator, and art scholar. Hello, Leslie. And then last but not least, we have Maria Sauvignon, filmmaker, multimedia artist, and educator. Hi, Maria.
Hi, all.
All right. So again, we're really excited to have you guys join us. So we'll be spending the first kind of 45 minutes of this evening kind of diving into this Q&A portion of our diving into this kind of panel of discussions that we have, panel questions that we have set for us. That being said, let's dive into it. All right, so and this is a question for all of our panelists. How would you describe? So you heard me do the definition of intergenerational trauma, but how would you describe intergenerational trauma? What does it mean to you? Um, Jay, would you mind kicking us off, if that's all right?
No problem. Can everyone hear me? Am I good? Cool. I think it is, for me, I kind of see it as you're kind of showing up with baggage from the moment that you're born, right? It's like you're entering the world and there's already things, the cross that you're bearing. And you're not cognizant of it for a long time. And I think it's when we reach a certain age, I think typically around adolescence, that we kind of start to have to confront this pain here and understand where it comes from. And so I feel like a lot of it comes up in our family dynamics, I think. So yeah, that's what I would say. I would say it's a depth of pain that we've inherited. Yeah.
Other thoughts? JennyMae, thoughts on this?
Yeah, that's a really great way to say that. Jumping off Jay, I mean, like that sort of realization that you carry it inside of yourself. I think that with something like intergenerational trauma, you first don't even realize that not only does it belong to you, it belongs to your family, your parents, and then as you sort of grow in learning, you can kind of see, you know, like the cascades of inheritance, both good and bad, that can happen. But um, it's just funny to see sort of repeated behaviors or repeated physical manifestations of different kinds of forms that, you know, and I really do look at it as something that goes as far back as, you know, colonialism, you know, and kind of inheriting sort of different ideals and that say over and over again for like 800 years that you're not beautiful, that you're worth less than, you know, that white is right and all of that, and that soaks in, you know, and it, you know, I think I've definitely read some studies that it changes the way your genes express themselves. So not only is it, you know, psychological and spiritual and energetic, it's like physical. So, you know, how do we address that, you know?
I definitely, yeah, I definitely kind of see where you're coming from. Just from both of your responses are, even just thinking about how it shows up within my family of just different traits that have passed down, you know, trying to cope or kind of deal with society in kind of similar ways. Leslie, Maria, thoughts on this question as well? What does intergenerational trauma mean to you guys?
So for me, it's just like lots of layers that are beyond like really 100% comprehension, layers that are definitely before our parents, grandparents, great grandparents, like and there's no like one source, like it just happened to fall that way, and like it's trickled down through different generations, different layers. So that's what for me it feels like, and certainly how I interpret it is that it's no like one thing's fault, one person's fault. Like it's something that is bigger and beyond than all of us.
And just, I guess, to build off of what everybody else has already said, for me, it's definitely what has already been discussed before, how trauma enters your body or enters a person's body on a cellular level. It can actually change the way our body functions or presents on a cellular level. And as others have said, on related to an inherited trauma from our ancestors, whether that's our parents or someone much further back, and then the way that it can also be very direct trauma as well, the way that it manifests in our parents and the way that actions might have been formed. They're maybe more toxic or dysfunctional actions might have been informed by their trauma, and how that comes into our bodies and how that kind of potentially loop around and manifest in physical ways, and potentially carry on. But again, of course, we have the
Still trauma. Just a quick note, folks, if you could make sure to have yourselves muted, just to avoid noise pollution. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I think I definitely understand where all of you are coming, not only emotional, but how it is it physically, whether it's like a kind of like a hunched back or like tension just in the shoulders that you can't. Um, so it's the next question. So how do you see, in what ways do you see that manifesting? So I know we kind of talked about it a bit, physically, emotionally, but I guess what are some examples or some like clues, I guess, that that come to mind for you? And anyone, feel free to jump in.
Sure. I'll jump in again, even though I just spoke. So for me, I have a really complicated past, like so many people of color, just having very complicated childhood trauma and then more recent trauma related to a significant loss in my life. In the way that trauma, I've always been very conscious of something kind of there, but it became a much more acute physical manifestation before someone in my life passed, and I developed an autoimmune disease. So it was this inflammation in my body that was appearing on my skin, but also appearing in my joints. And I know it wasn't just the immediate grief of potentially losing someone, but also the layers of grief. And then I imagine the grief that I was carrying from my ancestors who had fled their country, war-torn country, which is kind of, again, what I think Maria was saying, like this multi-layered trauma that kind of we carry forward and need to find ways to work and process out of our bodies in collective or individual productive ways, I guess.
Other thoughts on this question? Yeah. Go ahead, Jenny.
Yeah, I feel you, Leslie, in terms of the family complications and the, I guess, the mess that it can create. Like I kind of grew up in a family where there's a lot of anger and violence and just, as a child, you don't realize why this is happening around you. You just sort of absorb it and not understand. And as you sort of grow older and heal, which we can talk about later, you kind of see it as consequences of deep shame and deep feelings of worthlessness that get twisted around and become personality disorders, or kind of the emptiness that can happen in people's lives can just cause them to attack people around them, their kids, their spouses, like everybody. So it can be very damaging. And to Leslie's point about her autoimmune thing, it certainly damages the persons themselves. I see a lot of autoimmune in my family as well, and that's a cortisol spike in the body, and that's it's just eating itself up. So.
I think for me, when I was 10, I was getting a new molar in my mouth, and it hurt a lot. And my doctor's like, "Is it a wisdom tooth?" It turns out it wasn't. It was just a molar. But I developed lockjaw, and how I remember that was just I was waking up and like I would just go about my day, and my mouth was just naturally this like askew a little bit to avoid resting on that pain. And I think it relates to this because I think we develop ways of being. Kind of deal with our trauma, and after a while it becomes subconscious. It's not a conscious effort anymore, and then as that gets passed down, those ways of being, I think it seeps into our bones, and we don't even recognize that this behavior is a response to trauma. And so I think then having to confront that becomes difficult because it feels, I'm thinking intergenerationally now as a younger person speaking to the older people, like now it feels like you're creating trauma, you're creating pain by saying we have to address it and move it. And in their mind, it's like, no, like, this is, why are you conflating these two things? Like, this is not that. This is just how we are. Now, this is all very new age and millennial or American. You're too Americanized, like, to be talking about these things when it's just, no, but we now, this is what's tough, again, about the intergenerational piece. We, as the further removed from it, have the space to question, have the freedom to explore and mine and say, what is this thing? Whereas before, they just had to get through. They didn't have the space and benefit of reflection or this language even. And so sometimes trying to facilitate those conversations or try to about healing creates more tension. And that can also be a little bit difficult.
And just
to add in, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I wanted to add in on there's certain things that certain cultures, certain people deal with in how they interact with trauma. So in El Salvador, there is like there's a specific thing called when someone is suffering from nerves, and like it's very different. Like if you explain that to a doctor, they're like, is it anxiety? Is it anything like this? But it's like one of the few like reported countries where it's like a very unique thing, where like you'll like get like a random fever out of nowhere. You'll have like a lot of tension and a lot of pain in your body, like like it manifests like physically. And so like if you go to a doctor for that, like they have no idea what you're talking about, because it's like it's not a mental thing. It's just like um like how it turns into a physical. So you have like body pains, and you have like migraines and tension, and so you're suffering from the nerves. And there's specific medicines that's passed down from generation to generation, and like your like mother and grandmother and everybody else like knows how to deal with it, and they provide you with solutions. So like, okay, this is how I deal with this. This is how I um um this is how my mother or grandmother taught me how to deal with this thing. And it's just like, well, like how is it that there's like a specific condition that happens for a group of people, but it's like in other places around the world, if you need help with that, like it doesn't exist. And so so it can certainly manifest in physical ways that um there's no like solution or like real like fix for it, because it's just something that everybody has dealt with by generation, which is tough.
Oh. Go ahead, Leslie.
Just to go back to what Jay was saying in his piece, that kind of dysfunctional responses to trauma can become part of culture of a community or a household or a couple. And that's definitely something that is, I think, documented at this point. Just patterns of behavior that no longer are translated as an anomaly, they become something that's accepted and assumed and perpetuated. Which, as Jay also said, this is an opportunity for us to address those things with a little bit more awareness and clarity.
Last thoughts, Jenny?
Yeah, and I just wanted to bounce off of what Marie was saying, and I love that you brought in kind of the nerves that people don't recognize. And I think, these kinds of psychosomatic things that aren't recognized by Western medicine, I mean, it's like they're there, but there's structures in place that prevent, sort of the established medical community from recognizing certain conditions, and I just wanted to bring that up. I don't have any solutions around it, but for the fact that there are those deep indigenous methods like that recognize when something is wrong from witnessing it, from being there. And I don't know, I just wanted to acknowledge that, because I think it's a beautiful thing that communities can carry on, that families can carry on, and tribes can carry on, when we don't necessarily have the resources to resolve. If you go to a doctor, they're like, you're crazy, so I mean, they're out there, but we just have to look for other solutions.
And with that actually helps us kind of pivot into, so from trauma, so we know how it kind of shows up through physically, emotionally, through these nerves. But you could go to a doctor, could go to a therapist. That might help, but I guess what does intergenerational healing mean to you? What is a good first step? Is it kind of diving into, kind of as Maria JennyMae kind of mentioned, diving into the culture and finding into your culture and finding those remedies that are there? Is it kind of like a mixture of things? What does it mean to you?
To chime in, I would say like for me, like like believing not so believing in related to like medicine or things that can't really be explained by Western standards, like believing that that are there are things in our cultures that have existed in like hundreds and thousands of years, that, you know, it's okay if, you know, that, I mean, it's not okay, but like to be able to not compromise the validity that these things exist, that it's um, like, you know, oh, I'm going to adapt a Western idea and I'm going to go by the book and say, yeah, like maybe I don't know what like maybe this is like some weird thing grandmother thought of, or like this is some weird thing that my parents think, but it's not real. Like, I think that healing comes from that of like accepting that there is stuff out there that we don't 100% know about, but different people have been able to deal with, and heal as a community, and whether it's providing medicine, whether it's providing solutions, um, and so that's in like the physical aspect, and I would say that for me, so like my own definition of it is to uh, put a to heal like one generation by one generation. So to set the motions going. It's like, well, the generation before me didn't get to address this issue or that issue. I can see how that generation um, did not do previous generation did. So like being able to recognize those patterns of like, okay, so if I'm going to through a trauma, like the next generation will be able to, I don't know, find like a way to like alleviate some of that weight that they'll have to carry. I feel like each generation is not trying to copy the one prior exactly. It's more so like slow recognition of like, oh, this doesn't feel right. This isn't like it doesn't yeah, so it doesn't feel right. So I'm going to set the motions of this is how things are gonna start being different. And that's how I like that's my personal like goal and like definition that I wanna kinda aspire to. And in the way that I do that, it's by like art making, expressing and acknowledging and wanting to set forth the ways. So loaded answer, but yeah.
So, Jay, you have something.
Yeah. How do you know? How do you know that? Read my brain.
Oh, no, I just, I'm ready.
Yeah. I was just giving up that. I was just resonating so much with what Maria was saying. I really feel like, first and foremost, I think the goal has to be to break the cycle, right? And that means it's your own personal work. And so in getting your own healing, because I think it's very difficult to navigate trauma while you're still in it yourself. And so I think first and foremost, you have to figure out your own stuff, work for your own mess, and commit to, at the very least, saying it won't go any further if I can help it. The problem, I think, once you do that is you become hypersensitive to everyone else's trauma. And especially when it's family and you have functions and you have to be together, if you're healing or healed and you're in spaces and places where that bad behavior comes up again, it's very trying. You know what I mean? And it's just like, well, I don't know what to do here. I can't fix anybody. But then also it requires empathy, I think, right? Because again, these are responses, these are patterns in response to a very specific thing. And I know for me, growing up in a West Indian culture, our parents and families aren't big talkers about feelings, talking about even about their pasts. And as my mother, as I've gotten older, has begun to share just little bits of life, it's filled me with so much more understanding, so much more empathy. And so I would say trying to engage in conversation with people, to at least feel like it's a safe space, because I think sometimes too, when we feel like we're healing, I think we do peacock it sometimes, not intentionally all the time, but I think that people read that and get defensive about it because it reads as holier than thou. And so it's hard to engage in that way because there's just a lot of defense. And so then it's a lot. And so I've been thinking personally in my own life, like, with holidays, how do I deal and mitigate with all these different dynamics. And part of that is empathy, part of that is communication, but then another part is boundaries and just saying, I cannot, for my health and safety, exist in this space and exist in this way. And as difficult as that may be, I think it also paints the picture that the cycle is shifting and something is new. And hopefully it gives permission for folks to think about how they're how that shows up in their own lives and what they can do. I think it's very layered. Yeah.
Leslie, Jenny. Oh, Jenny.
Yeah, no, I totally feel Maria and Jay. You know, you're talking about breaking the cycle. You're talking about sort of finding empathy, and you know, I agree with that. And I think, you know, when it comes to this sort of healing, you know, I think the very first thing that has to happen, because I'm thinking of it from being within it and then like trying to find out of it, is to find space. I think space is the most important thing as like the first step, because when you're in it, if you're in an abusive household, if you're in a situation of anger, if you're in depressed, you know, and or in a state of depression, you know, it's so hard to have the perspective to forgive or to look at one another with clear eyes. You know, I think you have to create physical space, psychological space, somewhere, you know, be with people that can give you support, you know, like try to get away. I know that's probably the hardest thing. Like I had to, you know, leave my house in order for me to like come into myself. And, you know, like it was like amazing actually. Like it was like I could finally breathe. And, you know, I do think a lot of people are very sensitive, you know, like everyone's got a bit of empath in them. And if you're in a situation where the energy is just crazy, you're gonna soak that up. You're gonna soak up depression, you're gonna soak up anger, you're gonna soak up like all of those things. And that has to, you gotta let your rhythms kind of calm down, you know, like let the water chill out a bit, and then you can sort of assess where you are, you know, and honor yourself and be gentle with yourself until you're able to assess those things. So yeah.
So, Leslie, final thoughts?
Sure. I mean, for me, it was probably, my journey has been probably different than other people's. I had a lot of, I mean, I've had similar experiences, but the way I end up addressing them was a little bit perhaps differently. So you know, I went to therapy. I started therapy about, I think, 8 years ago, and did a lot of internal family systems in that work. And so that's about seeing yourself as a child, or at least a part of yourself as different parts of yourself as a child, and trying to nurture and soothe that part that didn't get that love and feeling of safety from our parents or whoever was supposed to provide that. And for a long time, I was trying to cultivate empathy and love and understanding and compassion for the people that, you know, kind of, you know, gave me experiences that were traumatizing. And I actually found that cultivating some anger was like the most healing thing for me. Not in, you know, not the kind of anger that kind of eats you up inside, but the anger that reinforces boundaries. Just to say, I didn't deserve whatever I went through in childhood, and I'm going to claim that, and also declare that I deserved better, as we all do. So, you know, I'm not done with feeling that anger, but I don't feel shame around that anger anymore. I think I try to numb myself out a lot, by trying to be mindful and trying to be more balanced, but it just wasn't authentic. So that doesn't mean I act out in anger, or I don't try to. I try to act out in healthy, productive ways, but there is this part of me that feels more inclined to be, I just want to be authentic and honest with myself. So that has been, you know, part of my healing, which I don't necessarily promote, but I do tell people when they have a difficulty with accepting and finding empathy, that sometimes you have to switch it up and actually go to that other side, that side that says like, I was a child, or I was whatever, and I deserved better, I deserved more, I deserved unconditional love. So for me, I still grapple with finding forgiveness for past generations, but my concentration really is on future generations, the young children in my family that have also been traumatized by the loss in my family. And so that's something I think about all the time. I try to cultivate and develop rituals of mourning and grief, but also joy. But also just back to that communication thing, allowing the person who passed to be alive still in some capacity, and to let those children know that they can express their feelings, whether that's through joy or anger or sadness, and that they can work that out through their body as well. It doesn't have to be through words. It can be through art making. It could be through running around dancing. It could be through, kicking the air. But really trying to, I think, as Jay was saying, or somebody else was saying, not allow that trauma to continue into other generations, and really try to give them the tools to soothe themselves and to feel whole within themselves, so they don't have to suffer the way that I have suffered and my past ancestors have suffered.
Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna say I felt all of that. That was yeah, and I think just one of the things that really kind of kept playing in my head as you're hearing the panelists talking is, yeah, seeing that, taking it generation by generation, either starting it on your own, like kind of starting with yourself, or whether it's even kind of seeing, oh, it looks like my aunt over there is starting to do some undoing of her own trauma as well. So maybe we can team up together on that, you know, or even just with, yeah. So I think there has been, or it seems like, I guess I'd like to know your thoughts on this. In your opinion, has there been more discussion or acceptance around topics of mental health and intergenerational trauma within communities of color? Why do you think that is, or is it true? And anyone, any panelists, feel free to jump in.
I'll go in. I would say yes, because a lot of people, like, I'm saying, like, the 30s to 20s year olds, the 20 to 30 year olds, 20 to 40, like, because of, like, the current, like, way that mental health is going, like, people are much more open about it. It's, like, there are Instagram accounts that you can get your daily inspirational quote. There's therapists now, like, lists of therapists of color, available online. Like, there is much more, like, openness, and so a lot of people that are, go into social work or psychology or psychiatry, they end up going into these communities and volunteering, and or wanting to work with these specific communities, and it's working with other young people. I think it's a great time for, for mental health advocacy, because they're young the young people that are going out into the workforce and are actually, I feel like they're coming in prepped, like, knowing how to connect with youth, and know how to, maybe even have had, are familiar with intergenerational trauma. Like, I don't think this is, like, a topic that was really strong and powerful, and, like, the different layers in years prior. And I personally feel like this is a good time now. Our older generations taking advantage of this, I almost feel like some are and some are not, because obviously, like, like, the older you are, like, you've kind of more internalized a lot of these struggles, and you're like, well, it is the way it is, and oh well, it happened. But now I feel like, because there's much more openness, like, you are trying to talk to their parents more about it, and are trying to be more vocal, and maybe now like older generations will be like, oh, I guess this is something I should talk about or should like consider. So in my opinion, like there's still like a long way to go, but I personally feel like there's a shift that has happened that is really big and it's really good.
JennyMae, thank you. Yep.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. I think among our peers, among kind of younger people, we're more liberated to speak about mental health issues like depression, anxiety, everything like that. And like, and I say that with like kind of, I feel like glad about it, but I also feel a little sad about it because, like I know that even though we've made like significant progress, we're still lagging behind in terms of like the white majority. I mean, that was sort of where kind of the push to having the dialogue about mental health happened first, and then we kind of logged on, and then but like I feel like we need it more because our issues, especially the intergenerational trauma thing, especially the years of oppression that have been passed down are so vast and so different. And so I think, when it comes to mental health and persons of color, it's important to recognize it as a unique thing with unique sets of problems that needs to be addressed. And I'm thinking, specifically about my own experience with therapy, but also, like I'm a big fan of the Center for Babaylan Studies, which is, a sort of return to Indigenous studies in Kapwa and the Filipino community. Well, when I went to therapy, I couldn't find, a person of color therapist at all. So it was mostly like white men. And I distinctly remember one therapist telling me, when I was talking about the Philippines, it was like, oh, why don't you go back home? And I'm like, okay, we're not going to go anywhere. So, it's incidences like that. And I'm thinking, Lenny Strobel, who helped found the Center for Babaylan Study, she has an anecdote where she was, before she sort of began the process of decolonization and exploring sort of the indigenous self, she went to therapy because of all the anxiety and stuff like that. And it didn't help her because she spent that whole time talking about the history and talking about like the trauma that the Americans placed on the country and the Spaniards and all this sort of, generational colonized mindset, and so I guess it's important to recognize those unique things, honor them, and talk about them more because, you mentioned that Maria mentioned that the older generation has more challenges with it. And I think that they're so much more entrenched in it than we are. And so to kind of wrap our arms around a long span of time is a great way to lift everybody up.
I think something interesting about the older generations having difficulty or being entrenched, I think self-care, right, that term that we use sometimes, or healing, it can sometimes feel selfish. It sometimes feels very indulgent. And we already have to do our own work around that, about being okay, about setting our boundaries and making okay with that. And I think sometimes for older generations, there's a part of me when I see my family, I just want to say, like, you can have more. You can like be more full. But sometimes the pushback is like, is that subjective? I think that's another thing that we have to think about with healing, right? Is like, is our vision for what is whole and happy and healthy, is parts of that subjective? Because I know that for us, it might mean it's radical individualism and having the space and capacity to explore and follow our dreams. Whereas there are deep cultural tenets that are about supporting the community and not putting yourself first, to benefit everybody, to benefit other generations. And that's true happiness, about being a part of that legacy and creating that. And so I feel like that's also a tension. And I think it's also, again, with this first gen thing, I have a privilege of being able to explore and think and have freedom and be so individualistic. I feel like that's another piece of it that's hard to know how to deal with, because it's just like, well, is that your pain talking? Is that like you being accustomed to your pain? Or like, is there actually validity in saying it's not about me, it's about what I've done for this family, what I've done for my community, and all of that. So I don't have an answer there either, but I think that's another unique tension that makes this and more of a complex and nuanced conversation.
Yeah, I mean, just to build off what Jay was saying, racialized trauma is so much more complicated and more complex, and not that other traumas are not straightforward, but there are multi-layered collective traumas that people of color and other communities go through that's much more nuanced or has a lot more components to it. I do think that the younger generations are much better at advocating for themselves when it comes to mental health. I had a friend that went to a therapist and said, I'm nervous. It was after the election, the latest presidential election. And she went to the therapist and said, I don't feel safe. And the therapist said, why don't you feel safe? You live in Salem, Massachusetts. And she's like, are you kidding me? Like, racism happens everywhere. But I do think on the flip side, as others have said, there's a lot of work being done. I think there's a ton of resources beyond just more therapists of color and therapists that are more competent in supporting people of color. There's a lot of things like this going on. There's, different resources, different affinity groups that are kind of emerging from kind of the craziness of the last few years. And I did want to plug a book that I read as a cultural healing course by Resma Menachem, and it's called My Grandmother's Hands, and it's Racialized Trauma and the Pathway to Mending Our Hearts and Bodies. And it's talking about a lot of those complexities that come with trauma and trying to heal it on an individual and collective level. And then also just different strategies for just observing it in our bodies, because as we've already talked about, trauma, comes and settles into our bodies or kind of makes a home in our bodies, and we can work those out in healthy ways and learn how to calm our systems down so that we don't have those cortisone responses, as JennyMae was saying. But yeah, I think it's something that still needs to be addressed because, as JennyMae was saying, it's still a very small portion of the community that is probably being served, and there still is a lot of stigma around mental health. And with good reason, right? I don't think anybody mentioned it, but mental health, the medical field in general, has not been a friend to people of color for a very long time. And so there's a lot of suspicion, and then we're trying to switch that narrative so that those spaces are safe, but that is going to take time. That's going to probably take a couple of generations. But I do feel like there's a groundswell where there's so much need for it and so much collective effort behind making that switch that it will come within our lifetime, which I'm grateful for.
Thank you all. Before we move on to more questions, I do want to give our panelists a moment just to kind of talk a bit about what they're working on, any upcoming projects or things like that that they'd like to share. Let's see, Leslie, would you be all right with kicking us off with just a few moments?
Sure. So just as part of my kind of personal healing, I'm actually adopted, so I have like complex layers of trauma growing up in a white household. But I've been trying to connect with my Lao my Lao cultural heritage, and so I'm actually presenting in a show or part of a show that's happening in Philadelphia through the Asian Arts Alliance or the Asian Arts Initiative. Sorry. There's still some questions just because of COVID-19. There's been some delays in reformatting of the exhibition itself, but I'm very excited to be participating as a Lao artist. And then there's some other things in the works that I hope to update you about in the near future.
All right, thanks. Maria, anything you'd like to share?
So am I okay? So for me, I have been wrapping up, and I will be releasing my film Hyphen, a short Okay, I just like that. A short, just because so it's been a project of mine for now 3 years, and I'm finally releasing it. And it's a short story of semi-autobiographical of 4 people that play me, and or of people like who are from Boston, who are an artist, who are maybe like Latina, maybe um, women who are working class artists, and so. Yeah, so I'm releasing that, and the website for that is hyphenmovie.com. There is like a subtopic of healing from intergenerational trauma within that film, and finding your own voice and creating your own identity, besides the predetermined ones you are born with. And I have also recently released a projection. Video, and did like a music sound mix. I presented it earlier, which is called Between You and I and Them. And that one is it came from like a time where I needed healing and I felt good to create. And so now I feel like other people need healing at this time. And so I have now been like promoting it a lot, just to get other people to feel good, to feel a little, at least an ounce better. So yeah, so both works, all like information will be on my website, which is mariacervillon.com. So I'm really excited to keep sharing all this work.
Jay, any things you'd like to share?
Yes. So Dunamis is the nonprofit that I mentioned before, and we do our work around nurturing and supporting and educating emerging artists and arts administrators of color. And we have 2 big initiatives that are happening right now. The first is Seeds of Joy. And this is our programming in the midst of COVID that we've been doing. And so it's virtual programs that last all through May, every Tuesday around 3 and every Saturday around 6. And it just has artists that are doing these really interactive and different types of programs for folks to be a part of, that are all rooted in just bring us some joy in the moment that we're in. And as of yesterday, our arts management apprenticeship, which is our paid arts management internship, has launched. So if you know any college students that are looking for internships, I know a lot have been canceled, but ours is not canceled, and we're paying people. So we can you can find all of that on our website, which is dunamis.org, dunamis.org.
Awesome. All right. Anything you'd like to share?
I love all these projects. They're so awesome. Yeah. So actually, one thing that I sort of am almost finished with, but and this is not an art project, but it was something that it was a website that I was building, and then I put it aside. And now with the whole COVID response, I really sort of pushed myself to get it done. But it's netalk.org, so New England Therapists of Color. And I've had challenges trying to find therapists, and I feel as though the resources are sort of scattered everywhere. So I've been working on trying to build a database, kind of like Psychology Today's therapist finder, where therapists of color can go and like log their information, and hopefully we can just sort of consolidate it. So it's netalk.org. It's not up and running yet, but if anyone's interested, they can log on, and there's a Google form if they want to get on the mailing list, so I can tell them when it goes live. My goal is to get it up and running this month. So it's not like I'm going anywhere. So I'm really excited. This is the first time I actually got a chance to talk about it. So that I do hope becomes a resource for everybody, because obviously this COVID thing has impacted communities of color really intensely, and I want to make sure that we're here to nurture each other as we kind of move on. And another project that I've been working on is the Dreamland Project, and that's at thedreamlandproject.org. And it's a series, I started it before this whole COVID thing, but it was a series of installations and kind of multi-sensory interactive kinds of things that focused on storytelling and empathy, and sort of understanding our pieces, and also understanding kind of our relationship to the American dream in the face of our uniquenesses and our differences. I want it to be a collaborative project. I have some projections that I'm working on, and some installation pieces that are on hold right now because I don't really know when I'll be able to build them anywhere. But I'm starting to move the project into the digital realm, and I'm actually wonderfully surprised and happy to see so many artists coming together. So right now I'm working with an Iraqi writer, and she just sent me some essays. So we're going to work on kind of music together and kind of putting that. But if anyone's interested in kind of collaborating and sharing their own personal stories, it's thedreamlandproject.org. And if anyone wants to reach me and talk, you can reach me on my website, JennyMaeCo.com, or on Twitter, Instagram, same thing, JennyMae Co. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Guys, feel free to also share links and things like that in the chat, or to me and Jeanette. We'll be able to get this out to our participants as well. Thank you guys so much. I would like to open this up to questions from the audience. If you kind of on the WebEx app, you'll see near the bottom here, there's like a little person with lines next to him. You guys, if you see that, click on that, and then on the side, you'll see like a little raise hand option. Or you could also just raise your hand too in your camera if you have any questions you'd like to ask our lovely panelists. Okay, I see a question from Karen Young. Is it Dreamland Project? That's the website. Oh, okay, all right. JennyMae's already put that information out there. Awesome. All right, great. But yeah, any questions to kind of for this audience Q&A section of things? Go ahead, Taniqua.
Oh, hi. First of all, this has really been an awesome panel, and it's been one that I've been looking forward to for several weeks now. So I really appreciate everyone's perspective and sharing their stories and their experiences. One thing I didn't really hear, but I mean, nobody really went into depth, is how gender norms play heavily culturally in a lot of folks' lives. I was definitely raised like Jay in a West Indian household where being the only girl child means that I am the end all be all when it comes to house maintenance and operations, besides cooking, because I couldn't do that. But I just wanted to know if anyone else had similar experiences, and just to know your thoughts on that, because there's definitely healing on that end. Another thought I had was, it was stated about setting boundaries for yourself when you're dealing with toxic relationships. But I've had experiences where I might have gone to the extreme in how I've handled it, and it's kind of backfired on me as opposed to helping. And how that has kind of affected my family. And I would love thoughts on that. Boundaries are perfect and not perfect, but they're great and they are necessary. But has anybody had a sour experience trying to build boundaries, even though you're trying to move forward with your healing?
I can chime in. Yeah, no, boundaries are very difficult. I mean, especially like as a female Latina, like I definitely had like I definitely felt like I had some expectations that I had to fulfill. Like I can't go out like and come out past curfew, and like if I have like male relatives, like nobody's worrying about them, and there's like talks of marriage and like, and so like, and that's something that we've been able, the younger generation has been able to like make memes and jokes about it, and have been able to be like, okay, like at that time, like in high school or middle school, it's just like, it was very stressful, and it's just like, oh, I'm the only one that has like this specific issue that nobody understands and gets it. But the internet is great in that sense that we can laugh about it now. We can make a collective feeling of like, okay, this is how we're going to start deviating from that with our own daughters. And yeah, so like I feel like when it comes to, because boundaries are so trampled very easily in a lot of like POC women's lives growing up, like nobody cares about your boundaries if you want privacy or if you don't want to, if you want to have a self-care day that day, or if you don't want to do the groceries, like it's just like nope. So I think that I think one of the great ways to kind of change or pivot some of that is to be forgiving of yourself in that sense of like you did the best you could at that time and with what you had there, like the past has gone now, and so like how do I make my own boundaries now and be like, okay, this makes me feel comfortable. What if I, of these two ways that I could go, if I went this way, how would this like internally make me feel? Will I feel like I did something right, or will I have growing resentment that is just gonna like, like I'm gonna keep getting trampled over and I'm just gonna keep getting walked over. And there's no real way to do that, but to be able to make even the littlest progress, especially compared to like younger days, is like I think it's something to be really proud of. If even you can like there be a time where you just say no, or I want to do this instead, or this is how, as much as you will have of me, or I can give, and that's okay. So
A couple more thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely agree with Maria. There's no reason to shame yourself. Trauma causes us to be triggered and to respond in very bodily ways, and our response can be up here when the situation might be more down here. But that doesn't mean that can't change. That you don't want to think that you don't have control over making those adjustments, even if it's a slow progress over time. And so I would definitely recommend something like internal family systems, because that's something you can kind of do on your own when you can take some time to be quiet by yourself and to rethink about the situation and think about why you got stressed out, with no judgment toward yourself. And you can really find where in your body that's causing some kind of response, whether it's your breathing, your chest is getting tight, your throat. And you can think of it as a defense, some kind of survival response. And instead of feeling shame about it, you can send it love and understand it's your body trying to protect yourself from something, whether it's reasonable or unreasonable, it doesn't matter. And if you can kind of learn to sit with it and breathe space into it, you can really have a different reaction potentially going forward if that's an ongoing process for you. So instead of feeling shamed or ashamed of yourself, you can realize, like, I can make a little bit of space, and each time it happens, maybe I breathe a little bit more space into that reaction in myself. And so you're not blended into your emotions. Your emotions are here and you're over here. So you're not being owned by your emotions anymore. You're separate from them. You can take a more observant position rather than being all in it all the time. That's just one technique I've learned from my therapist, thankfully. So
I love that, Leslie, sending love to those little sad and angry parts of yourself. I wanted to address sort of the gender norms thing. I, you know, I never felt comfortable in entirely the box that gets set out for being, a female or female bodied. And I think it's tough in immigrant communities or communities that aren't as open to being more fluid or being different or being queer. And it's hard, it's tough to say. I can't really say that there's always going to be acceptance, because you're not out there to resolve their kind of issue with gender norms or issues with queerness. It's like it's for you and you to find that sort of stability in yourself. So if you come across it, I think the most important thing to have is that community, and a community of people that are open, that will accept, whatever gender or orientation or anything that you are, so that you can kind of go back and fill your cup again when you're getting stressed out about, you know, somebody expecting you to behave like a woman or look like a woman or be subservient. I mean, the whole like Asian female thing is like rife with all these perversions of sexuality and submissiveness and domesticity and all of that, and it's in the air, and luckily it's getting so much better, so much better, but you know, when you confront it and you can't necessarily change that, I mean, you need to know that you can own your own space and own who you are, and then know that you're not like alone, and you have people around you that will like accept you for you 100%, and then you realize that you accept you for 100%. So, you know, like whatever with their, you know, problem. So yeah.
Yeah, I really love and resonate with what JennyMae just said, and I think it's important to hold people accountable for what they've done and for what they do to you, but you cannot, and I think you get into really dangerous territory where you expect part of your healing to come from them. It's very possible that they will never hold themselves accountable. They will never say what they need to say. They'll never break those patterns. And if we keep waiting on that from other people, it's always going to be painful. It's always going to bring this anger out in us. And I've had situations where I got put back in situations, and I thought I was good because I created, as JennyMae said earlier, physical space. I had distance. And so over here in my little pocket universe of my regular life, I felt fine. And then all of a sudden, as soon as I was dropped back in there, it's just like, oh, there's still a beast inside of here raging I haven't made peace with. And part of that is because, yeah, I was waiting for like, where's your healing? Where's your doneness? Where's that? And I think it was the first time I really had to confront, I might never get what I need from somebody else. I might never have the relationship that I want to have with them. And so, one, how do I use my empathy to understand why they're functioning in this way and give them some grace to know that when I'm trying to bring up these conversations or have healing, it's not about blame. It's not about attacking you. It's just, I want us to be healthier. I want you to be healthier. I want you to be happier. But also knowing that that is a choice that they have to make. That I can't tie my well-being and my health to someone else. I just don't have the capacity or space. And that's unkind to myself. And so I think as you're navigating, it might be a thing that helps with to kind of release the expectation. I feel like I just heard it this week. Will it come back to me? To hope is human, but to expect is ego. And so I think to hope relationships improve, but to expect an apology, to expect those things, I think that is about ego, that is about us, and those are things that we can't control.
All right. Any other questions? I think we have time for one more. I do have one that I'd like to throw out, and I think it was kind of touched on a bit already. But I guess what obstacles when it comes to taking that first step towards intergenerational healing? What are some obstacles, whether internally or externally, that could make that difficult? And what are some ways maybe that either you or you can think of to overcome those obstacles?
This conversation we're having is intersectional, especially culturally, and I feel like it doesn't happen enough. And so that we kind of cross communicate these things. And the older I get, I've just been like, we're all victims of the same colonizers. You know what I mean? And so I'm just like, why are we fighting with each other? I'm just like, that is the biggest, like, excuse my French, the biggest mind fuck that like we've been kind of goaded into this infighting that seems so crazy to me that only benefits people that have historically oppressed us. And so I think sometimes we're fighting so many different fights, in my opinion, unnecessarily with each other. And I think that it creates its own issues as well because we're so siloed in our healing sometimes even, right? There's the personal, but there's our community, there's our family, and there's our home, and then we still hold resentments against each other. And so I think until we, as people and creatives of color, all together have these discussions and try to heal together, while obviously still being reflective of our diversity, I I think that's another layer that's really, that creates some difficulty.
Any last thoughts on school?
I would say, oh,
You go ahead.
thanks. Yeah, I mean, it's difficult. It's not impossible. Any progress is good progress. A lot of it's, you know, we don't have to forgive everybody and anything that doesn't serve us, but forgiveness of self is always first and foremost the most important. You've done the best you can, and it's a journey, and it's about remembering how certain things made you feel and being like, okay, so I've acknowledged this has happened, and I want to see a different future. I want to see something brighter, healthier, loving, and the people before me did the best that they could, and now it's like time um, to wish that they eventually find that peace, and then it's like for ourself, it's you know, like I did the best I could with what I had, and I forgive myself for anything that I wasn't able to do, or and so how do I put an end to any cycles that I don't feel like will be helpful for the next generation over. And I'll be like that. And I think that that's how healing works, when we make a when we acknowledge and remember and forgive, and then be able to create something new. So I think that yeah, I think that it's a journey, but it's not one that, it doesn't mean that it'll never completely end. Um, yeah, that there's always more to explore and more to learn from when it comes to healing.
Right. Oh yeah, go ahead, Jenny.
Oh, just kind of quickly, I think what, because it is challenging to sort of begin the journey, and in a way, you're always on the journey. I think life can sometimes, or is, like stumbling around in the dark and really don't know what's happening there. But what we can do is amass and find resources. Like this community and this group has been so wonderful. Getting the conversation going. And that helps with external support, and internally, and this is something that we can all do, is read and listen. For me, just reading every book that I can. I'm thinking like Alice Miller's The Body Never Lies, or Coming Full Circle by Lenny Strobel, or The Drama of the Gifted Child. I remember reading everything, just so that my backpack and my tool belt and whatever could be as full as possible, so that I could MacGyver situations, or had options to different ways of thinking about situations. Because the more that you can learn, the more you can kind of expand your world. And it's kind of, healing in a way is like an opening of the self, and seeing connections with you and your family, and you and your ancestors, and you and the natural world. So whatever you read to help, whatever you read to find joy, and like all of that is going to give you stuff, and reading and music and art, all of that, just engage.
Thank you so much. So this was a very full. I feel very full from this discussion. It's been great just to hear all these amazing thoughts, and see how they all kind of feel the connection there. Thank you to our amazing panelists. If you'd like folks to reach out to you, well, we got some things out. If you'd like folks to reach out to you, please feel free to leave your contact information, our website in the chat box, as I mentioned before. Thank you so much for being a part of what has been an incredibly healing night, just discussing intergenerational trauma and really diving into healing with such like-minded individuals. Thank you to our audience for further fueling this discussion. It's been great talking with you all. As previously mentioned, this discussion has been recorded and will be available on our website, which is at www.creativecolourboston.com. There you'll also find out more about CCB and how to support our mission. You'll also be able to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and we'll put those links in the chat box as well. And I think I think this discussion, being able to also share those resources, for example, my grandmother's hand, that I'm going to be reading that that has been added to my Amazon list. Yeah, it's just having these supports. It's been amazing. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you for having us. And thank you everyone who came too. Wonderful.
Thanks. All right, y'all.
Thank you all.